Welcome to The Pick List, the podcast for curious food industry minds. I'm Julia Glotz, a writer, editor and consultant specialising in food and drink. Every week, I'm joined by an expert guest to discuss the news, trends and developments shaping food and grocery retail right now. You'll get a personal perspective on how business leaders and leading thinkers from different parts of our industry are making sense of the big issues. My guests will also share what's on their personal reading list, bringing you a curated selection of thought-provoking articles from the trade press, national media, and other titles. You can find links to all the articles and suggestions for further reading in the episode show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. Now let's start the show. Hello and welcome to episode 53 of The Pick List. I hope you're having a good week. My guest this week is Helen Burgess, founder of Little Cooks Co., a monthly recipe box kit for kids. Helen has a really interesting story. She used to work in government as a senior civil servant at the Cabinet Office and at Number 10, but had long been interested in food, health and nutrition, and in fact she is a registered nutritionist. And so when she fell pregnant with her son, she decided it was time to leave government and follow her passion and create Little Cooks Co. And Little Cooks Co. is all about getting kids excited about healthy, nutritious food. You'll hear Helen talk about how concerned she is about the loss of basic cooking skills and that people, and especially kids, are just becoming increasingly disconnected from the food system. One thing I really liked about talking to Helen was that she's clearly very passionate about what she does, but she's also pragmatic. And one thing she said that really struck a chord with me is about the importance of making sure we give children a choice in how they eat. It's not about being dogmatic or purist and wanting everyone to eat nothing but organic, home-cooked meals all day, every day. It's about making sure kids have a choice in how they feed themselves when they grow up. Because if kids grow up without basic food knowledge, without the ability to cook a meal for themselves, they have no choice but to rely on convenience foods later in life. So that's coming up in a moment, but first, let me bring you up to speed on some of the big food and grocery retail stories this week. It's been a very busy week for news and innovation at Asda. First of all, the retailer appointed Stuart Rose, the former boss of M&S, as its new chairman. Rose led M&S between 2004 and 2011 and was most recently chair of Ocado. Asda also announced it's trialling a new in-store concept for draft beer as part of its efforts to reduce packaging and offer more refillable options. Shoppers can use reusable glass containers to take home 12 craft beers and ciders poured straight from the tap in store. The pilot scheme is being run in partnership with specialist craft drinks retailer Craft on Draft. It's currently available at Asda's store in Milton Keynes only, but could be extended if the trial proves successful. Asda also made headlines this week by announcing it would hide 30 items of Gucci clothing among its George and Asda lines. The Gucci items will be second-hand and will cost as little as £12. No, this is nothing to do with food and drink, and yes, it's absolutely a publicity stunt. It's also tied in with the release of the new House of Gucci film. But I think it's a really interesting sign of how much Asda is pushing on the sustainability front at the moment. They're trialling lots of stuff, they're being very innovative. And for context, Asda started selling second-hand clothes in 50 of its stores earlier this year as part of a partnership with pre-loved Vintage Kilo. The UK food and drink industry has launched a new roadmap to ensure more sustainable water use. It comes after COP26 highlighted water shortages as a key risk arising from climate change. Signatories to the new water roadmap include Co-op, M&S, Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Nestlé and Coca-Cola. There's more consolidation happening in the rapid grocery delivery sector. Getir this week announced plans to acquire Wheezy, and it comes after GoPuff acquired Deja and Fancy earlier this year. Princess Group has launched a new platform to make it easier for it to work collaboratively with retailers on new product development. The new platform is called Collabs, and it involves a panel of 3,000 consumers who can test and provide feedback on potential new products. Princes says the new platform will make it easier for retailers to stay on top of trends and identify NPD that has what it takes to be commercially successful. This comes as there's a lot happening around NPD and product discovery at retailers more generally at the moment. Last week, Tesco became the latest UK retailer to sign up to RangeMe, which is a product sourcing platform that streamlines the product discovery process for buyers. The platform basically allows buyers to browse and search for new products and suppliers based on a wide range of criteria, and it's particularly focused on streamlining how smaller suppliers get their products in front of buyers. Asda also recently signed up to the platform. Sales of eco-friendly pet food in the UK have soared over the past 5 years, according to new figures from the Marine Stewardship Council. The number of pet food products containing MSC certified seafood is up by 57% over 5 years, albeit from a relatively small base, and more than 7 million packs of MSC certified pet food were sold in the last 12 months. And finally, Co-op has confirmed it won't be running a traditional Christmas TV campaign this year. Instead, it will produce what it describes as the UK's first live advert to highlight community solutions to food waste. It will use a 2-minute ad slot during ITV's Coronation Street to go live to a community organisation to show how they are running community fridges and fighting food waste and hunger. And 10-second versions of that live ad will then run throughout December. These are some of the big food and grocery retail stories this week. You can find links to all the stories in the show notes and on thepicklist.co.uk. And now, here's my conversation with Helen Burgess. Helen, welcome to the Pick List. Thank you for being my guest.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you are founder and director of Little Cooks Co., which is a healthy cooking kit for kids. You are also a registered nutritionist, but before you got involved in food, you used to be in government. Quite a senior level, in fact. You used to work at the Cabinet Office and also at Number 10. I have so many questions for you. I can't wait to dive into this interview. But let's just start with what you're doing right now, which is running Little Cooks Co. What exactly is the concept? How does it work?
So it's a monthly recipe box that we create for children aged between sort of 3 to 10, 3 to 11, all in the aim of trying to introduce them to real food, to understand the impact, the amazing power of food, and how to cook with it. And, a lovely consequence of that are these amazing family opportunities to get together and bond in the kitchen, as so many of us have got, memories of childhood where we're helping our granny bake, or the smells of coming in and, smelling, mum making something and getting involved. And there's such powerful opportunities. So as a busy mum myself, and knowing, you want something that you can do with your kids that's just easy and stress-free. So we send all of the dry organic ingredients in the kit. I create or approve all of the recipes from the sort of nutritional perspective to make sure they're as nutrient dense as possible. And it's just to try and help this kind of issue where cooking is becoming lost. The connection between food and our bodies is becoming lost in, sort of understandably, in our very busy, very pressure-driven modern life. But it's trying to be a bit of an antidote to that and have an impact, a positive impact on family life and children's health.
And so when you send out your kits, you said all the dry ingredients are contained in the boxes. Do people then sometimes have to go out and buy some fresh ingredients to make the recipes as well? Or how does it work?
There's always a few extras that people have to buy, but we email a week before to say your kit's on its way, and this is what you need to get. And we've actually excitingly just this month launched our savoury range. So up until now we've been baking. So the things that people have to add are like milk, butter, or coconut oil or whatever. But now we've launched our savoury range. So there's like the beetroot falafel that we did this month. They obviously have to buy the beetroot and a couple of other bits, but we try and keep it to the absolute minimum. But part of the savoury range, the concept is sort of garden to plate. So the key ingredient of each recipe, we include organic vegetable seeds for them to grow and harvest their own food. And that is such a magical thing for like an adult as well as a kid to experience, watching a seed grow into a little seedling and then harvest that to put in, to cook into a recipe. That's very much part of trying to help children understand where food comes from as well.
Fantastic. And how long have you been running now?
It's just over 4 years now. It was May 2017, so we're coming up to 5 years quite soon. So yeah, it's been an absolute roller coaster because I just set it up from my kitchen table, like, real cottage industry. Just gave it a punt because I worked in government, as you said. Prior to that, I didn't have any business experience, but I was very passionate about wanting to, use the nutrition information and knowledge that I built up from my 3-year course that I did into something that would make families happy and teach children. And then, so the first 2 years, I was just completely on my own, doing it from my front room, and got, steady organic growth, which meant I was able to then successfully raise funding. And then from there, it's kind of scaled hugely through lockdown, which was a complete whirlwind. So suddenly I'm like, oh gosh, what just happened? It's me. And now, it's a kind of a business that I'm running with, staff and supply chain. And, it's sort of grown up a lot, I suppose, in the last couple of years, which is...
I can imagine. And are you purely D2C? Is it all done through your website, or do you have any retail presence or plans to potentially take the concept into retail at some point?
We started last year, we dipped our toe in and did a range for boots, a couple of cooking kits for boots. So we've done that again with them, and we are primarily D2C, and I think that will remain our strategy, but we are looking to expand into the retail space. We're on Ocado. But yeah, that's part of our 2022 strategy, I think, to get into a few more like-minded retail outlets.
Fantastic. And that sounds like it's definitely something we're going to keep an eye on and see what you get up to in retail, because of course there's a lot of growing interest, isn't there, from retailers actually in that whole recipe kit space. So I imagine you'll have quite a bit of interest. But I'm so interested in your personal journey into this as well. How did you go from working in government to wanting to get involved in food, and then kids' nutrition and food in particular? What prompted that?
So in government, I adored my career in government. I got to work on so many amazing policy areas and doing so many different roles. I did end up working in Cabinet Office number 10 when I fell pregnant with my son. And it was like just the most crazy, amazing, interesting, privileged, little bit disillusioning experience, which in some ways made me realize if I want to have an impact. So I'll talk about where my sort of passion for nutrition came from. Government change is slow, and that's understandable. There's got to be the right analysis, laws, regulations. It is understandably slow, but it was frustrating for something that I felt very passionate about, and as well, it was not the sort of lifestyle where I thought I could raise my son and have adequate time with him, because it was pretty brutal and stressful, and I didn't want those in my life when I was like raising my son. So that getting pregnant and going on maternity leave was the sort of catalyst for, right, I'm just going to be brave and I'm just going to do something completely different. But my passion for nutrition came from my dad, who, when I was like 16 years old or something, he gave me a book, and none of us had cancer at the time. It's called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Living. And it was all about this chap's journey into how he had tried all the orthodox, approach to tackling his very aggressive chemo. And then he turned to lifestyle and nutrition, and he cured himself, and he was cancer-free for 15 years. And it just completely blew my mind. And he gave it to me, my brother, and my sister at Christmas.
That's
like, oh, thanks, Dad.
Great. Cheerful, yeah.
Exactly. He's a very quirky man. But it changed my life. It set me on that path. I found it so empowering. There's so much in life we don't have any control over, but how we choose to nourish ourselves, what information we choose to absorb into our minds, that's stuff that we have control over. And it really unleashed this real fascination and passion. So I then was like reading loads of books, but I missed the kind of understanding of why. So I would learn, oh, well, vitamin A does this. I was like, but how and why? And when I decided that I was going to quit government and I knew I wanted to do something with nutrition, I had a role where I could observe all of government's work, and all I ever honed in on was, I think at the time they were doing a hospital food review. And I was just like, what's happening with that? What's happening with that? Because it's so disgusting how terrible food is in hospitals. Anything to do with kids' education. And that was always what I was honing in on. So I was like, I've got to do something in this space. And nutrition, arming myself with a credible, knowledge and understanding in the area then made me feel like, okay, I can start a business in this because I'm going to arm myself with the right sort of qualification and knowledge. So.
Absolutely. I'm so interested in what you were saying, though, about the frustrations sometimes of working in government, because as you said, you had a front row seat to some big policy initiatives affecting food as well. You've already talked about the hospital food initiative. I imagine sugar tax, responsibility deal, RIP, probably also something that crossed your desk. You weren't part of the civil service, so you had to be impartial looking at this. I wonder what you learned about, I suppose, the challenges that governments face in tackling things like hospital food, childhood obesity. What is the biggest reason progress in these areas often seems, as you say, so slow, so sluggish?
It's fixed term parliaments, I guess, but you've got to have democracy. So, I mean, I've got an issue with this at the minute, with one of the articles I shared with you about, it's very short-termist. I think when I joined government, I think they were 3-year fixed term parliaments, I think, and then they extended it to 5 years, which is obviously right, because you want the government in power to have a longer term view. So they invest in things, at the start of Parliament that could see, progress throughout. But you have to invest in things that are going to be 20 years off. And, governments don't really want to do that because they might not get the kudos for it. So really, to invest in hospital food, you need huge investment in infrastructure to put kitchens back into hospitals. Same with schools. Lots of schools have outsourced catering and are just at the mercy of beige, long life food that is not nourishing kids at all. But until they have the infrastructure in school, and that's very costly. So I think that's a real challenge. It's also, it's all about winning votes essentially. And it's, in some ways I don't envy that. I think that there's, they can get a lot of flack. But in the end, you've got to have the public interests, put the public's interest really in the forefront. And if we really want to tackle like childhood obesity, they've got to make decisions now that are going to impact in 10, 15, 20 years time. And I don't know if they're doing that. For example, with the sugar tax as well, when you were talking about needing to be impartial, and I found that really stretched me to my limit. Because my personal view of the research I've read, and you always find research that tells you something else. So, you've got to read the research with an open mind and then go with what your gut tells you. And sugar is just basically being replaced with artificial sweeteners, as far as I can tell, more or less. Some aren't reformulating in that way, but lots are. My view of artificial sweeteners is that they're no better. They damage the gut and the microbiome in a way that is not beneficial to weight gain, all of those things. But that's not necessarily something that, the primary goal is let's just reduce sugar and let's make sure that we look good on that barometer. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's being replaced with something pretty toxic. Well, yeah, but the sugar's down. I've got strong views about it, so to be impartial was quite hard.
I can imagine. For people either in the food sector or campaigners who want to make a difference on food and nutrition, what did you learn from working in government about how to best make yourself heard? What do people from industry, for example, typically not understand about how government works and how decisions are made?
I mean, I think that you have to be realistic. You have to look at where, read the manifesto of the government of the day, because as much as people think they are just something that's pushed out before an election, I worked across 3 elections, and those manifestos are really interrogated with rigor about how well are we performing on our manifesto commitments. So you've got to have a good understanding of where they're at and what their kind of ambition is in the area you're wanting to tackle. A lot of people just don't pick up the phone. But if you searched on gov.uk and looked for the right policy person in Department for Health, in DEFRA, and picked up the phone, you'd probably have a pretty decent chat with them and understand and talk to them about, well, are there any consultations coming up that I could contribute to? Are there any roundtables or, industry events coming up that I could get involved in? And just kind of make yourself known at that kind of level. And then, you can try and access from the top as well. Having a influential spearhead is always helpful. Like Marcus Rashford is obviously like the most unbelievable example of that at the minute. But if he, helps a smaller business or a smaller charity, he's going to get heard. So yeah, there's a few different ways, but I think persistence and, doggedness is another kind of definitely good qualities to have when you're trying to tackle government. So
I can imagine, but of course, I think many listeners actually, will work for companies and organisations who are facing exactly that challenge, who want to make sure that their voices are heard in some of these really important debates. So actually hearing your take on this and getting a little bit of advice from someone who's been on the inside, I think is actually very, very helpful. Now, you've already touched on some of the articles that we're going to talk about. Before we dive into those, I just want to quiz you a little bit about your reading habits. What are you like as a reader? What publications do you read to keep up on industry trends? And what types of stories typically capture your attention?
So I have a sort of love-hate relationship with like media, I suppose, because there's so much noise, isn't there? There's so much that you could just be, do nothing but read, and sometimes just sort of be at the mercy of what's put in front of you. So I'm pretty careful about what I consume. So I generally have Google alerts set up for my interests. And then I don't generally read the sort of mainstream that much. I'll, rely on the fact that Google alerts are amazing. I also set up a Google alert, not so long ago for Little Cooks Co, which I wish I'd done ages ago, because then you sometimes pick up when you've been talked about and you're not expecting it through your PR agency or whatever. So that's quite a good little tip that I hadn't done before. I would say I'm more listen. So I listen to podcasts a lot. If I'm ever on a drive, I'm always listening to podcasts. So I'll usually just put in a topic that interests me, very, health and nutrition related. So I love Dr. Chatterjee, for example, who, is such an advocate of lifestyle medicine and how just popping pills is never going to help us get away from diabetes and obesity. You've got to address your lifestyle and what you're eating. And so I would, and I get a nutrition magazine once a month that I read from cover to cover. But I think that's my way in, is this sort of Google alerts to keep me up to date with the current affairs. And then it's usually fairly dense reading books about, psychology or nutrition or health, and then loads of Audible books and podcasts.
Fantastic. Where do you get inspiration for your recipes from? Because you said you are very closely involved in developing the recipes and signing them off. Where do you get ideas for recipes?
Instagram, actually. I do find Instagram can be quite, it can take so much of your time up, but you're just so amazing how you can come across such brilliant, innovative ideas. And then usually the way we create recipes is to take something that children will be familiar with, but then put our slant on it, which is to take out the refined ingredients and try and find some nutrient dense ones. So Deliciously Ella at the very start of the journey was quite a big inspiration. As when I first had my son, I remember making her like sweet potato brownies and being like, what? Potato. And so that kind of, then it was the Hemsley sisters, I think, after that, and it sort of followed that path. But now I've got a sort of lots of freelance recipe developers, and we put ideas down and we talk about it and we think about the themes of the boxes, because we want to, like, it would be lovely to do a jam roly-poly, but when can we do that? When it's seasonal, we can do it when there's strawberries, where we can encourage children to grow or pick their own, and making like lovely chicey jam with it. And so we have like quite good content sessions where we come up with the ideas, and then at this stage actually it's more the recipe developers who will come up with the recipes, and then we test them as a team and with our children, and then we always send the recipes out to 4 families who are either subscribers or not, but have said, oh, we'd love to help your development, to get them to test it for us as well. So we're, our children are very used to, their palates are very used to our food now. So
Fantastic. Now let's talk about your first article, and it's from The Guardian, and the headline is NHS to set up 15 special clinics in England for severely obese children. And just to summarise the story quickly for listeners, this is news that more than 1,000 children a year are to receive treatment at these 15 clinics as part of a pilot scheme to trial early intervention measures to help them lose weight. The children will be aged 2 to 18 broadly, and the treatment will include diet plans, mental health support and coaching, and also support for the family. And the overarching goal here is to prevent more children from developing serious long-term health problems such as type 2 diabetes, heart attacks and cancer. And again, for context, 1 in 5 children in the UK is affected by obesity at the moment. Helen, what was your reaction when you read this article, and why did you pick it?
So, I'm not anti-government, as I said. They are realising there's a very big problem and they need to do something about it. So they are taking action, but I just think it's the wrong action, especially when I saw that 2-year-olds were going to be included. They will naturally then be in an environment where they're being they're hearing the words diet and being overweight, and I just don't think that is any good for a child to be in that sort of environment. But equally, it's like a sticking plaster on what is a much bigger fundamental problem, which is why are children becoming obese at such a young age as well, and that's that the food system needs fundamental change. The government needs to be bolder and invest in different areas to tax ultra-processed fake food that is designed to be addictive, that's so cheap, so available, that it's impossible for families, especially on low income, to choose much else, because it's the most affordable thing out there, and the kids love it because it's designed to be that way. So until they address that and make it a much more a food system that actually encourages people to be healthy, how many clinics are they going to need? It's going to be never ending. So I think it's just a bit of I hope that the children that go through it will benefit. I hope it's not wasted money, but if they were to address the prevention side of it, that would be so much more powerful.
As you said earlier, it's obviously the pace of change of government is so slow. And I suppose there are children who have very urgent needs now and who perhaps could be helped by some of these clinics, and don't have time to wait until someone has come up with a more fundamental rethink of the food system. I mean, as you said, though, like you, I was, I swallowed quite hard when I read that, the age group here starts at 2. As you said, that's
Yeah.
obviously quite scary that children that young would require that level of intervention,
Mm.
but also, as you say, what does that do to a child to be in that kind of environment? I mean, the fact that there is quite a lot of emphasis on mental health support and supporting the family, I'm hoping that is a positive sign, that there is a sort of slightly more holistic and interdisciplinary approach here, rather than just making it about, you are too heavy, you need to lose weight, we're putting you on a diet.
Absolutely. I think, there were some things about it where you think that this could create then the long-term change for that family. So if they are upskilled and they, leave that clinic with, 10 recipes that they can, know what to buy, it's affordable and they can cook them, and they have a new understanding of food and not just the sort of calories in, calories out, which is so outdated. The benefits of eating real food and avoiding the processed food, that would be great. And I totally take your point. There is a problem now and it needs to be sorted. I think this let's see what happens, and hopefully they will, it's a pilot and hopefully it will show good results, and they can roll it out whilst there's still, such a huge demand for it. But I think as well, there's such a lack of, I said it at the start, the cooking skills and this connection with what we're eating and our bodies and how we feel is so linked, and it's just lost, and there's not barely any of it in, the majority of schools. It's not being taught, and children would have a much better chance of understanding their health and, empowering them with knowledge if they got that information at school as well. So it's got to be addressed in lots of different ways. But it was when I saw that article and I thought, oh, where's the action that's being done to prevent, as rather than just this kind of, oh, there's a big problem. The gains they would make from the reduced impact on NHS services by just helping people be healthier and, empowering them with the information they need to nourish themselves and be healthy, is going to have so much of a saving. But, probably not in their parliament, and might not be them to take the benefit for it. But
yeah, and I suppose, as you said right at the start, that is one of the big challenges, isn't it? And it's not just on health, sustainability, just any of those big systemic changes that really require a long-term strategy are fundamentally incompatible with the system we have at the moment. I want to move you on to your second article, because you've actually already touched on one of the points that it covers, which is about ultra-processed foods. So I think it will link in quite nicely with what we've just been talking about. So the second article you picked is from Technology Networks, and the headline is "Urgent Need to Reduce Children's Ultra-Processed Food Consumption." This is from a little while ago, but it highlights an important study led by Imperial College London that sought to quantify what percentage of children's diets currently comes from ultra-processed foods, and then also look at the extent to which consumption of these foods is then linked to overweight and obesity in later life. And it found that ultra-processed foods accounts for about 60% of children's calories on average, and that the more ultra-processed foods children consume, the greater their risk of becoming overweight or obese later. And there are a whole host of measures the researchers then call for in light of these findings. One of them is new national dietary guidelines that emphasize the importance of fresh or minimally processed foods. And there are other countries, including Brazil, Uruguay, France, Belgium, Israel, that have already done this.
The extent of it's so shocking. I think that's part of what made me, share that article. It's just, I think it also says that 1 in 5 children get 78% of their calories from ultra processed food. Yeah, what chance have they got to live, to really thrive, to live optimally with that lack of nourishment?
But parents, I suppose, and consumers in general are bombarded with messages about what they should and shouldn't eat for health, for the planet, for whatever. And I sometimes worry with the debate around processing and ultra-processed foods is that, are we adding yet another thing to the list of things that consumers are going to worry about? And is this yet another thing that people are going to feel bad about? Because even though, of course, unprocessed foods are fantastic and should be a much bigger focus of our diets, is it helpful to tell people about, to make them really worried about processing and ultra processing? How do you think we can strike that balance and make people feel empowered to make good choices and not freak them out because sometimes they need to buy a ready meal or need to rely on more convenient options?
Totally. And as a parent myself, and all the labeling, I'm a registered nutritionist and I will look sometimes be like, what? It's just so, and the health messaging that's put on some things, and you look and think, hang on, it's not actually, yes, it might have, high fiber, but it's also got, X, Y, Z. So I totally get you. And certainly with Little Cooks Co, we're so much about the positive. It's not purist. It's, we all, our children all have cake and chocolate and ice cream, and it's about redressing the balance, I suppose, and helping empower children and families to think, actually, I can knock something up quite easily with just a few ingredients. And it's really difficult. I when those things come out, I like it because it's a bit of a spotlight up to government to say, look at this is the state of things. And if it is hard, but if it helps people have a better understanding of what ultra processed food is, because you wouldn't naturally think that, bread is ultra processed, but a lot of it is, if it's just the sort of very quick baked white bread. But instead of that, you could have, a whole wheat loaf, and that will have better. So it's helping educate to say, like, I'm sure there's lots in the ultra processed food bucket that was, shared with that article that people would be surprised by, and that's good, that it would help inform and help people make decisions with that knowledge. But yeah, I totally get you, and I think we have to have, as parents, that sort of 80-20 or whatever it is, of you can't beat yourself up. Your kids are going to sometimes need to just have a takeaway or a ready meal when life's hard and difficult and busy, and after school clubs and this and that, and the shopping might not have come. So it's not about making people feel guilty. It is, as you say, about trying to empower them.
And I think your point about redressing the balance, so perhaps say, well, maybe not 60% of the calories need to come from this, but a relatively smaller percentage. I mean, there are some people who are calling for, the NOVA score, essentially, which is that system that you described a little bit earlier about classifying how processed a particular food is. And there have been some calls for NOVA scores to be added to food packs, and I think there are some apps already where you can essentially get the NOVA score along with nutritional information or information about eco performance as well. Do you think adding a NOVA score would be helpful, or are we overloading people with more labeling and more information?
I think if it's added, it will feel overwhelming. I think if it potentially replaced some of the labeling at the moment, like, for example, I'm much more, my personal view, and lots of people won't agree with this, but is the macronutrient profiling is quite outdated in our sort of thinking, and something being high fat does not necessarily mean it's not nutritious. It could be that fat comes from seeds and nuts and provides an unbelievable amount of micronutrients that is so healthful, but people would go, oh no, it's red for fat, and I'm not going to do that then, because fat's been demonized for so long, and it's only, I think that's starting to change, and people are realizing that, it was the scapegoat for sugar. But adding lots more. And then, the I saw that was being something that's considered, and I thought, oh, how wonderful. But you think, God, someone's going to pick something up in the supermarket and think, what on earth? Like, how do I judge this product? Because there's too many things being thrown at them. The process, I would prefer to know how processed something is. Our whole ethos at Little Cooks Co. is it real? And after 3 years of training in nutrition, and it was so complex and challenging, much more so than I thought it was going to be. But all of it boiled down to, if you eat real food and a good variety of it with lots of colours, you'll be all right, pretty much, unless you have very specific health issues that need, different profiling. So that's what we apply in Little Cooks Co. It's how real is the food, and if it's not been too processed, then you're good, really, and just to simplify it that way.
Now, I want to take you on to the third article, and I think it will actually allow us to keep on that conversation about ultra-processed foods, particularly in the context of kids' diets. So this is one I picked. It's from Anthropocene magazine, and the headline is "Children Eat Meat Unknowingly, Perhaps in Violation of a Bias Against Animals as a Food Source." Quite a lot to unpack there, but this is basically a couple of US studies that explored children's knowledge of and attitudes towards different foods. What they found is basically that children are often quite confused about which foods are animal-based and which foods are plant-based. That was a particular focus of this piece of research. So, for example, quite a few of them thought hot dogs, bacon, chicken nuggets are plant-based and not animal-based.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the second study, they asked children to classify all sorts of edible and inedible things as either okay to eat or not okay to eat. And the stuff they asked them to classify included grass and dirt, but also pigs and cows and chickens. And they found quite a large majority of children, 70% roughly, said, well, cows and pigs aren't okay to eat, and 65% said chickens aren't okay to eat. And what I thought was quite interesting here, aside from the specifics of, plant-based versus animal-based, the commentary from the researchers, on the one hand, is tying it to sustainable diets. They see an opportunity there to say, well, maybe younger generations are actually quite open to reducing their consumption of animal products based on this. But they're also pointing out on a more basic level that it shows that disconnect that you've talked about between, parents not talking to their kids about where food comes from, not connecting the dots between the chicken and the chicken nugget, and also potentially suggesting that parents might hide the animal origin of certain foods in case it upsets kids. So I was so fascinated by this, and I'd love to hear your take on this. What did you make of this?
I found it so interesting, actually. And particularly the way they were trying to then potentially draw the conclusion of, children have a natural empathy for animals, and we should use that to try and reduce consumption of meat. You just think, well, there's lots of fluffy pigs and cows in nursery books, and they're taught about them in that very fluffy, empathetic, lovely way. And, so it's natural that would grow, I suppose, in childhood. But the thing that really just shone out to me is that, at the end of the article, the commentary says it anyway, it just shows the absolute lack of understanding of food and where it comes from. And, if children had been brought into the kitchen and helped to prepare the, if they were going to make chicken nuggets from home, or if they were going to make a lasagna or whatever, and then they would see, oh, that's mince, that's beef. They could have a conversation about it. It sparks all that, amazing chat that happens in the kitchen. And it's clearly not happening, or not happening enough, because that disconnect is so stark, to read those results. And the other thing I thought, them saying that burgers, unless they're very progressive and they've had like lots of plant-based burgers that haven't gone to the market these days, things don't look like they are meat. Hot dogs, it's so processed, and it doesn't look like the meat. When you cook a steak or you get a chicken breast, and it just doesn't have that same quality. So it's sort of hidden anyway in the manufacturing of the food. But yeah, it was shocking, and I suppose it shows the influence that those early years have, and that being in a household, an environment, a school, a nursery where food is discussed and in an open way and talked about, and kids get involved in the cooking, would just so help again redress the sort of balance of where we're at the minute.
Yeah, and that for me, that was definitely the main piece that stood out there. I think that disconnect. Like you, I wasn't quite as convinced by this sort of push towards plant-based foods, because it just felt like there was quite a lot to unpack there. And I was quite interested in your view actually on plant-based foods. In light of the conversation we've just had about ultra-processed foods, because again, talking about consumers and parents being bombarded with lots of messages and quite contradictory messages, there obviously are a growing number of people who are thinking of switching to more plant-based options, often for very good reasons in terms of health and the environment. But many of those plant-based analogues are heavily processed, they are ultra-processed. What's the right balance to strike there?
I think so. Two things. So it's hard work to be a very healthy plant-based on a very healthy plant-based diet, because you have to cook so much. And as you say, the options at the minute, there are some really good ones. I don't want to diss the market for, there's some amazing companies, but the majority of it is processed, and you're not going to get the full profile of macronutrients unless you cook it from scratch. So that's intensive. But the other thing I'd say is we're so individual, and there is no one diet that would suit us all. So some people thrive on plant-based and some people do not do well. And in childhood, I think it's my preference is to provide them with the whole full range of nutrients from the most healthful sources possible, and then they will develop their natural palates and their natural preferences, and go through really annoying fussy eating periods, which is the thing to do, which is you just got to kind of, in the majority of cases, just wait it out. But to restrict certain food groups or portions of a diet at an early age, I just think is not ideal. That's not to say that children can't be raised vegan and not thrive and have amazing health, but it has to be done with a lot of care and thought about what nutrients might need a little bit of topping up, what might be lacking, because plants give us the most unbelievable, amazing array of phytonutrients and and antioxidants, but there's lots that we need as well as plants, I would say, for childhood development.
What kind of feedback do you get from your customers, from parents who've perhaps started cooking or baking more with their children as a result of using your kits? What do they tell you in terms of the difference it makes?
We actually recently did some case studies with some customers to talk about that, to say, how has Little Cooks Co impacted your life and your children's lives? And it was just, I wish we'd do it every day, because it's a lovely thing to hear. It really is the best feedback, to hear that children have grown in confidence and can now knock up a meal for their family, or that they're eating more variety, they're more intrigued by food, they're always pulling up the stool to help it, and they will remember tidbits of like the nutrition. It's always very fun and playful, because we're very much about this food being a positive thing that children enjoy and understand, but to know that we've helped seed that early knowledge that food is amazing and delicious, and that you can use it and cook with it and feed yourself. If children can't cook, then they have no choice when they're older but to rely on the convenience food, whether that's takeaways or, ready meals or whatever it is. So to know that we're helping to empower children to avoid that when they're older, they might not choose to, but hopefully they will, is amazing. So yeah, when we get feedback like that, it is just wonderful.
Fantastic. And as you said, I think it's about enabling that choice. Mm-hmm. They may still, and they will definitely at some point still choose the ready meal or the takeaway, but it's about making sure they do have that choice. Mm-hmm. Helen, we're out of time, but if people want to find out more about you, connect with you, find out more about Little Cooks Co., what's the best way to do that?
So our website is, we have a contact form on there, that is www.littlecooksco.co.uk. And our handle on like Facebook and Instagram, Twitter is @littlecooksco. So yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn, Helen Burgess, founder of Little Cooks Co. So yeah, I'd love to hear from people to, hear what they think about this conversation, or if they want to hear more about Little Cooks Co.
Super. Helen, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. If you did, please consider giving the Pick List a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're listening and leave a review. It tells me you're enjoying the show and would like it to continue, and it helps me reach more listeners. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn @juliaglotz.com and on thepicklist.co.uk. And if you'd like more thought-provoking reads for your personal reading list, please subscribe to The Trim, my free weekly newsletter at juliaglotz.com/newsletter. See you next time.